Reverend Birgit Gaudreau, and I'd like to welcome you all back to Know Your Bible. And today we're going to study Genesis chapter 30, and there is so much detail to cover in this chapter, so I'm going to do this in two parts, and today is part 1. So in the last chapter, Genesis 29, we learned that Leah married Jacob first, and 7 years later, Rachel married Jacob. And then Leah, as we learned, she bore 4 sons for Jacob. And so Rachel, she really envied her sister, and they were rivalries. And so here, Rachel, she's so frustrated, she's running to Jacob and says, if I don't bear any children for you, I'm going to die. And so he's very angry and upset that she said that. So now Rachel had this marvelous idea to give her husband Jacob her maidservant as wife so that she could have children through her. So here Rachel had a new plan and ran to Jacob. Verse 3 to 8. So she said, here's my maid, Bilhah, go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her. Then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. And Rachel's maid, Bilhah, conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. So now in chapter 9 to 13, wouldn't you know it, that Leah came up with the same idea that Rachel had. She stopped bearing, so she went to her maidservant, Zilpah, and said, take my husband Jacob as wife. So she gave her maidservant to Jacob as wife. And guess what? Her maidservant bore 2 sons for Jacob. Verse 14 to 16. Now Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, is it not a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? Then Rachel said, therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. Then Jacob came out of the field in the evening. Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. So now I'm going to take the time and talk to you a little bit about mandrakes, because mandrakes were an important root back then. It is still found today in some parts of Europe. I don't know if you can find it in Canada. Maybe some of you would know that. And so I found a lot of research, and I found a very interesting information about the mandrake root. Here's a picture of the mandrake plant. It has bell-shaped flowers, leaves can be poisonous, and it has yellow round ball-shaped fruit. In ancient days, people were very superstitious. When you pull out the mandrake root, it has a screaming sound, and back then they believed if you would hear this screaming sound, that you would die. So they used animals to pull out the mandrake root for them. Leah and Rachel were fighting over this root. So they thought back then this root would bring good fortune. The shape of this root resembles human figures, like women and men, and it had good byproducts. They used it for medication in many ways. The mandrake root has potent compounds and is used for anesthesia. It's also used to heal many sicknesses, even today. And the smell of this plant is like apples, very fresh apple smell. In the book of Song of Solomon, chapter 7, verse 13, it mentions the fragrance of the mandrake root. So here in verse 17 to 21, God opened Leah's womb again, and she bore another son to Jacob. And then she says, God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband. And so she called his name Issachar. And then Leah conceived again a sixth son. And Leah says, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him sixth son. And so she called the sixth son Zebulun. And so now she was extremely happy. And on top of it, she bore a daughter. And she called the daughter's name Dinah, which is actually still a popular name. Verse 22 to 25. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my own country. So that was part 1 in Genesis chapter 30, and I will continue in part 2 in the next video. So please join me again, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And blessings to you all, and see you again the next time.